The stakes are higher than ever as private and public sectors are driven by escalating ESG expectations. India's ambitious goals, aligning with NDCs, underscore the critical role of the building sector in achieving net zero emissions. The introduction of a long-term strategy at COP27 emphasizes enhancing energy efficiency in the building sector to meet these targets. However, a key challenge lies in the lack of accurate data on energy usage, particularly in existing buildings. Today, we delve into the imperative of data-driven solutions in commercial buildings, a cornerstone in India's energy policy. This session will shed light on advancements in building energy benchmarking, offering tangible examples from vital sectors like hospitals and airports. Together, we'll explore how benchmarking plays a pivotal role in setting performance standards, scaling retrofitting projects, and laying the foundation for performance-based building energy codes. To set the context for this session, I would like to invite Mr. Akash Goenka, Associate Fellow AEEE. Akash is a seasoned clean energy transition professional specializing in India's energy efficiency policies and their nexus with climate change. His expertise lies in climate-friendly cooling, national cooling action plans, and building sector energy data. With 5 years of experience, Akash has solidified AEEE's global presence in climate-friendly cooling. He holds a master's in sustainable energy from Imperial College London, complementing his background as a mechanical engineer. Please join us on stage, Akash.
Thanks, Alicia. I stand before you today to prove to you really that benchmarking is indeed beautiful, and also that it is a very powerful idea that we believe whose time has come. And I'm sort of standing in front of you with conviction that by the end of this presentation, and certainly by the end of this session, you would be sort of fully convinced that benchmarking is really the way to go. As Alicia mentioned in her introduction, the energy consumption and GHG emissions of India's commercial buildings are being shaped by sort of 3 dimensions that we have identified, and these are of health, growth, and climate action. India's long-term low emissions development strategy, which was in fact launched last year at COP27 at Sharm el-Sheikh, formulated to support India's updated 2030 indices and long-term 2070 net zero goal, highlights the potential to significantly reduce the national power demand by improving the building sector's energy efficiency in terms of design, construction, and operations. Therefore, enhancing the energy efficiency of the commercial building stock of India should be an important aspect of India's national energy policy framework. Understanding how buildings use energy is critical to formulating any new policy, underscoring the importance of credible data. Data enables informed decision-making. But I put this question to you: do we have enough data? We feel that a data-driven policy framework for systematically targeting energy efficiency in both existing as well as new buildings is largely missing in India, and even outside. Different stakeholder groups need different types of granular energy data to design and implement energy efficiency interventions with tangible outcomes. And you see some of them on the slide. And we feel that a lot of this data is presently missing for commercial buildings in India. So to put it in a nutshell, to foster a more systematic approach to commercial building energy data collection and reporting, AEEE, with the support of our partners, and there are many, has embarked on a long, tedious, but hugely rewarding journey of getting primary operational data from commercial buildings. And over the last 2.5 years, some of you might be aware, For the others, AEEE has benchmarked the energy performance of two key commercial building segments, that of airports and hospitals. And I'll be touching upon the two of them briefly in my presentation. I want to firstly give a huge shout out to the Airports Authority of India for leading the way among India's PSUs in data transparency and disclosure. Airport Authority of India's SUGAM program, which is Sustainable and Green Airports Mission, provides in-depth analysis of the energy use and emissions intensities, and these are normalized by sort of three parameters you see on the slide. That is gross floor area of the terminal building, passenger traffic, and flight departures, annual flight departures. And we've done that for more than 100 airport terminal buildings in India. This isn't meant to be a technical presentation, so I won't be sort of going too deep into the numbers, but I do want to leave you with these graphs on the screen to just pique your interest so that you feel curious to download the full report, which is out in the public domain. This is a closer look at the top 25 airports in India in terms of their passenger traffic. And whilst I'm not getting into the numbers, I do wish to use this graph to invoke the well-known concept of building performance standards, which is a critical policy tool to align the building sector's operational energy consumption to, say, either a country or a state or a city or even an enterprise, in this case, the Airport Authority of India's climate commitments. And benchmarking is a universally accepted approach to derive these targets. Just for example's sake, AI could establish the average line, that is the red dotted line, based on this benchmarking analysis as the minimum building performance standards for its airports. And that would mean that Chennai, Calcutta, Calicut, Amritsar, and Trichy would need to bring down their energy intensity of passenger traffic to meet the minimum standard by, say, implementing energy efficiency retrofits. Shifting gears now to the hospital sector, I think all of us in the room would empathize that the energy requirements of Indian hospitals is diverse, since they are marked by distinct heterogeneity. In terms of ownership, there are public hospitals, there are municipal hospitals, railway, defense, privately owned hospitals, and then in terms of size, there are healthcare facilities ranging from small clinics to large multi-speciality hospitals with varying levels of air conditioning, medical services, comfort levels, patient privacy, etc. And all of these have an imprint on that hospital's energy consumption. An accurate characterization of the energy used in different types of hospitals across geographies is a prerequisite for mainstreaming energy efficiency and even renewable energy in them. And this requires, well, reliable data, which, as I explained, is largely missing. And therefore, to plug this data gap, the National Center for Disease Control, which falls within the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Alliance for an Energy Efficient Economy, and the Center for Chronic Disease Control released the results of a recently concluded National Hospital Energy Consumption Survey in August this year. And to our knowledge, this is unprecedented in scale and depth, since it covered more than 600 public and private hospitals of 10 typologies in 18 states across all 5 climate zones of India. And the survey results have been sort of useful to present the first ever baseline of the energy used by hospitals using primary data. It's also estimated the hospital sector's carbon footprint and helped identify several areas of energy efficiency and renewable energy interventions. I wish to use the high-level findings of this survey to discuss a few nuances related to building energy benchmarking. And you would have heard Professor Jyotirmay Mathur in the morning sessions, wherein he spoke about sort of the delicate nature of EPI, that is Energy Performance Index, which is a widely used metric for measuring the energy efficiency of a building. It is the ratio of the total energy consumed by a building in a year to its gross floor area, and typically a lower EPI indicates a more energy efficient building. I want to kind of highlight a few things here. Firstly, the definition of floor area or gross floor area is not consistently followed across standards and policies. And this isn't a problem that is just sort of, limited to India, but even say in the US, which is far more advanced in terms of benchmarking since they've been doing it for about, I think, 40 years or so. For the purposes of this study, gross floor area was the sum of all the conditioned as well as non-conditioned floor area, excluding basements, driveways, and parking lots. But our on-ground experience taught us that area is not understood consistently by facility managers and engineers in charge. The other thing I want to highlight is that EPI uses the total electricity consumption and not the net electricity consumption, which would disregard electricity sourced from renewables, particularly, say, on-site solar PV. The use of a net metric may obscure the energy efficiency of the hospital. In fact, peer-reviewed literature suggests that net EPIs can result in inefficient buildings, which may result in significant inequity in policymaking, since all building owners or operators do not have the same ability to install on-site renewables. The graph here shows a large diversity in EPI, even within the same hospital typology. And this can be attributed to energy efficiency factors, such as the end-use equipment or appliance, behavior, factors unrelated to energy efficiency, such as differences in air-conditioned area, levels of medical services provided, hours of active use, the climate zone, and the degree of outsourcing of services, such as, say, catering or laundry. Because of the notorious, almost notorious nature of gross floor area, we also experimented with another sort of, KPI, which we called the annual energy use per bed. And this too can be sort of, attributed to factors such as end-use equipment and several others that I mentioned, and also sort of particularly patient privacy. We wanted to benchmark the hospitals by the occupancy, which would be sort of what is known as inpatient days, which is sort of the number of inpatients multiplied by their average sort of overnight stay in the hospital. But unfortunately, we were not able to do this because many hospitals were either not recording this data metric, or they were not willing to share it for confidentiality reasons, since it's a business metric. Since we are fresh out of the hospital survey and before that the airports benchmarking, which was slightly easier, we feel strongly that long format energy surveys is perhaps not the future. In fact, we have published an entire paper on our on-ground data collection experience, which was, believe you me, not without its challenges. And I will be presenting this paper, in fact, tomorrow at 9 a.m. at Regency 2, should you wish to be there. Whilst smaller, more targeted surveys can still continue, we need to transition from long, tedious, and expensive surveys to modern data reporting methods, as opposed to collection, using, say, for instance, IoT. And such data will help policy researchers to continually benchmark the energy performance of different hospital typologies or other commercial building typologies, and establish aspirational building performance standards, which I explained using the example of the airports. And this can be sort of, that this would segue into data-driven retrofitting, etc. In fact, AEEE is pushing for a large-scale commercial building retrofitting program in Uttar Pradesh and Maharashtra that brings together data disclosure and benchmarking, setting performance standards, implementing retrofits, particularly through the ESCO model, and robust monitoring and verification. And in my last few slides, I wish to link benchmarking to building code implementation. As part of India's G20 presidency, the Bureau of Energy Efficiency launched its strategic plan for advancing energy efficiency across demand sectors by 2030. Feel free to look it up, it's in the public domain. And this was co-created by AEEE, SE4All, and IEA. And this strategic plan identifies 5 high-impact energy efficiency opportunities, one of which is around modernizing building code implementation. You would see from the slide that most G20 countries have formulated some form of building energy codes. 18 G20 members have adopted building energy codes for residential and commercial buildings with varying levels of stringency. Interestingly, some places have even started adding more complexities to their code to sort of move them towards net zero. And in India particularly, the EC Amendment Act of last year empowers states to enforce specific provisions for energy efficiency and conservation. However, I think we would all agree that the effectiveness of any code depends on its robust enforcement and high compliance rates. Unfortunately, there is a massive gulf between the quality and stringency of building energy code development and its enforcement and implementation, which falls typically under the purview of local authorities, even in developed countries, as you would see from this graph, as evidenced by the ratings from the Global Building Performance Network, GBPN. And you will see that this is true even for developed countries that have had building codes for, say, 40, 50 years. And if we compare it to the global south, resource and capacity constraints would further exacerbate the problem. AEEE is conducting a deeper analysis to ascertain compliance procedures in these G20 countries, and just sort of two quick findings. Firstly, that enforcement and compliance with energy efficiency codes in G20 member countries vary, and the choice of enforcement can impact compliance effectiveness, with third-party assessors offering expertise, but potentially raising conflicts and costs. Secondly, on-site inspections play a critical role in ensuring compliance with energy efficiency and sustainability. Maintaining the integrity of these inspections is essential, requiring adequate funding and qualified professionals to address issues such as staff shortages and lack of training. And whilst we can sort of continue to learn from each other's best practices to streamline the inspection processes and automate compliance, I wish to invoke a parallel approach to code compliance, which can potentially, say, become mainstream by 2030. And that is what I call outcome-based building codes. And it's seen in, say, Japan and Australia in small pockets. And these this format of code compliance goes beyond the commissioning stage of buildings to the operation stage and prioritize achieving specific energy performance targets. Current technology, including IoT-enabled meters, sensors, and cloud-based energy management platforms, can validate building performance in real time and even facilitate grid interaction. This will potentially create, we feel, high-value jobs whilst making policy goals more efficiently attainable whilst lowering government costs. I want to leave you with these thoughts, and I'm very excited to hear what our panelists have to reflect on some of these ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Akash Goenka, for highlighting the data challenge and the need for benchmarking. I would now like to invite to the stage Mr. Guru Prakash Shastri, Head, Climate Action, Infosys, to give us an insight on how Infosys redefined high-performance buildings. Mr. Shastri is a distinguished sustainability leader with over 19 years of expertise. As the Head of Climate Action at Infosys, he spearheads the decarbonization and environmental sustainability initiatives. He's elevated Infosys to global leadership in environmental sustainability, setting new industry benchmarks. He is also a lead accredited professional and a certified energy auditor. Please, Mr. Shastri.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks to AEEE, thanks to Satish for inviting me to this conference and giving me an opportunity to speak. So I'm going to talk about the sustainability journey of Infosys and how energy efficiency in particular has played a big role in what we have achieved. So in summary, that's our journey. We started in 2008 with a high focus on sustainability initiatives, and 2020 we turned carbon neutral, and we also published our ESG vision for 2030. So that's the achievement. Carbon neutral, we are carbon neutral for 4 years in a row now. But what is more important here is the approach that we have taken to carbon neutrality. The first thing that we worked on, very focused, was on reducing demand through energy efficiency. That's our first and the most important step, and the most significant step, I would say, in achieving these goals. The second was to avoid emissions, which is by shifting to alternate energy, renewable energy sources, and whatever unavoidable emissions are still remaining, maybe because of travel and so on, is offset through carbon offset projects. This is the fundamental approach. It's very, very important to know that reducing demand is very important first step. Without reducing the demand, if we continue with the same demand, same consumption, same behavior, we are not going to achieve any of our climate goals in future. So a little more deeper into the data. Now, why we are talking about thumb rules is this is what we started with in 2008. Pretty much most of it was based on thumb rule, right? Air conditioning design was maybe 200, 300 square foot per ton of AC. Lighting was 1 to 1.5 watts per square foot. So this was very, very clearly, these are some of the thumb rules that the consultants followed. Right? We had to challenge each one of them. We had to go by what is actually required by design, by simulation, by looking at what actually our buildings are consuming. We put up a lot of meters, energy meters and sensors everywhere in all the buildings. And we did sub-metering, we did very granular metering to see what was actually happening. Then we were able to define new set of metrics for our buildings. So from here, today we are at 60 to 70% lower in each of these parameters, whether it is building EPI that Akash just mentioned, Energy Performance Index, which gives a measure of how much energy consumption per square foot of building is happening. The lower the EPI, the more efficient the building. Similar for lighting, 67% lower than what is typically used in the market as design in the industry. Air conditioning design from 350 square foot per ton to 800 square foot per ton. That's the minimum. In Bangalore type of climate, our buildings are at about 1,000 square foot per ton. Have you imagined? You just compare with what you use at your homes. You have a 150, 200 square foot room and you have a 1.5 ton AC, right? It's a 100 square foot per ton. That's what we use. And actual requirement is 1/10 of that. So that's the kind of over-design that happens. That's the kind of thumb rules that are used in the industry. Similar for electrical design, 3 watt a square foot compared to 8 watts a square foot. And many cases in the industry, it's up to 10 watts a square foot. So it's a 70% reduction in the electrical demand. I'll come to a slide where I'll show the impact of what these will mean. So how did we go about this? The first and foremost thing was an integrated design approach, very clearly based on data, based on clear goals. Everybody had clear numbers to work with. Nobody was working on thumb rules. So the architect had a goal of heat gain. What has architect got to do with heat gain? So they thought. But it was important that the architect knew what kind of design will get in, how much of heat, how much of air conditioning will be required. So if an architect is designing a building which will require 400 tons of air conditioning versus 1,000 ton air conditioning, it's really good, right? It's much better for us. So it's a good design in all aspects. So we focused on clear integrated design where all the people, all the different stakeholders of the project came together and worked towards a common goal. So when you give a goal of 0.7 watts per square feet on envelope to the HVAC consultant, So he has to ensure that the architect is designing in that way. If it is more than that, his HVAC design will go up, and he has to come and complain to us saying, I'm not getting this design from the architect. So that's how there was a integrated design approach that happened, and we were able to achieve these parameters. Similarly for lighting, if you have a lighting design of a certain way, it had to be in sync with the building facade design, because we are very also very particular about daylighting. Just imagine sitting for 9 hours, 10 hours in a day in a closed room without any natural light. It's really terrible to do that day on day for years. So we aspire for 100 lux for 100% of the almost 100% of the building, at least 100 lux of daylight. So which is achieved in most of the buildings, and on top of that, it has to be glare free. No blinds are provided in the building. If anybody asks for blinds, then the architect is penalized a part of the fee. So that's how performance-based goals were defined in a building. Similarly for the water goal as well. So different stakeholders have to come together to achieve these goals. These are not independent goals. These are not independently achievable by a single stakeholder in the project. So as an example, one building in Mysore, when we started, we were at 622 ton of cooling. Is the initial design with 66% glass on the building, which is window wall ratio. And look at the annual energy consumption, 3.2 million units, maximum electrical demand of a megawatt. So when we did this step by step, when we went by tightening the envelope, making the envelope more efficient, then lighting design, taking the actual wattage of computers. Do you know how much a laptop consumes today in terms of wattage? Actual consumption is 15 to 20 watts. And we are designing for about 30 to 40 watts at Infosys and applying a diversity on top of that. So that's the reality. But what happens in the industry, still people use 150 watts for a PC. Who is using a PC with a CRT monitor today to consider 150 watts? But that's the reality. That's what happens in the industry. That's how consultants are designing. Why? Because they can oversize the air conditioning system by 2x, 3x. So this is the reduction. Look at the capacity reduction in air conditioning, 36%, 45% lesser energy consumption, and 43% lesser peak electrical demand, which means the contract demand with the utility is that much lesser for us. Something a little more detail on chiller plant, some of the innovative cooling systems that we have implemented at Infosys. One of them is radiant cooling. So radiant cooling has two different temperatures of chill water. Radiant cooling is, the cooling is mostly done by radiation. We have chill water running through either the slab or through the ceiling, which has baffles. Chill water circulated through these surfaces, and any body within the space is directly radiating heat to the surface, to the cold surface. And because the surface is near to you, you don't have to go very low on temperature. So that's why we have a medium temperature chiller at 16 degrees to take care of most of the cooling. And some of the latent cooling is done by the regular chiller, which is at 7 degrees. So look at the total chiller plant efficiency. I'm talking about plant room efficiency of 0.44 kilowatt per ton. This is among the lowest that you can get, and this is very much possible. This is what we have achieved in one of our buildings, and in fact, recently in Feb 2023, the entire G20 delegation of the Energy Transition Working Group visited this building to see how the systems are designed and how the chiller plant was designed. Now coming to how do we arrive at a cost efficiency? So all this is fine. Does this cost extra? Does this cost more for us? We saw very high efficiency designs in terms of adding insulation, very high glazing, very high performance glazing, and so on. But when you want to arrive at a cost efficiency. Lesser heat means smaller chillers, means smaller pumps and cooling towers, smaller plant room, and smaller pipes, smaller requirement of insulation. So you drill down to each aspect of the building which is impacted by the reduction in design. Then you will achieve a very good cost efficiency as well. So finally, you will achieve a cost which is much lower than the regular building, but 65% more efficient. And this we have achieved for several buildings at Infosys since the last 15 years. Every building at Infosys has been 3 times more efficient than what we used to do earlier at lesser cost than what we used to do earlier. Just to give you an example, for a 1 million square foot, look at what can happen with a new design versus old design versus conventional design of the industry. Of course, the operational energy is very low, 6.5 million units versus 25 million units in conventional design, 20 million units in a fairly okay design. But the most important thing is, look at the transformer capacity, 4 MVA versus 12 MVA, 7.5 MVA DG set versus 18 MVA DG set. That's a huge reduction in cost. Plus, if you add the space saving because of the smaller equipment, the cost really comes down in a significant manner. So, which is about 300 to 400 rupees a square foot, what we have seen in our buildings. That's the reduction possible by taking advantage of the integrated design. Next, coming to retrofits, this is in existing buildings. Some of the retrofits that we have implemented in lighting, air conditioning, and UPS systems, and of course some in the facade and hot water systems and so on. One example here, this is a schematic of a chiller plant retrofit that we did in Mysore, in our Mysore campus. See the layout here, how many equipment are there versus the retrofitted one here, which is having much lesser equipment. It looks much simpler, right? It's of course more efficient as well. 74 valves versus 25 valves. See the space saving here. I'll show you the space saving in actual drawing that we did, working drawing. So 30% reduction in energy, 45% reduction in the number of equipment, and 25% reduction in space. This is the actual working drawing of the plant, layout of the plant. This is how the plant room was, and this is how it became after the retrofit. So when we enter the plant room now, suddenly we find there is something missing. Such a huge space is suddenly available in the plant room. Did we miss any equipment? You feel like that. But it's actually 30% more efficient. So over the period of time, of over 15 years, we have reduced our connected load by 36 megawatt due to retrofits. 18 megawatt in HVAC, about 15 megawatt in lighting, 15 megawatt in UPS, and rest in lighting. And finally, continuous monitoring. This is something that we are very, very particular about. It's not enough to just design a building in a very efficient way. We also need to ensure that it is maintained in the same way during operational phase as well. So that requires continuous monitoring of all the key parameters, efficiency parameters, all the equipment efficiencies, equipment health. These need to be continuously monitored so that we know what we have designed is actually working. So today we have nearly 20,000 sensors connected, 10,000 energy meters, and more than 1,500 flow meters which are feeding data into this command center that we call, where all the data is getting managed. So with all these, what we have achieved in total is a 55% reduction in per capita electricity consumption. So we did all, I showed you all the slides on independent initiatives, right? So how does this all come up to our electricity bills on an organization level, how does it translate to? Because that's what is visible to the leadership, right? So we were tracking per capita electricity consumption. So continuously that was reducing. It reduced from 297 to 133 kilowatt hour per capita per month. So, which resulted in avoiding 2.36 billion kilowatt hour over a 12-year period. If you see this graph, so we started here. Our electricity consumption in 2008 was 225 million units, and it's almost a straight graph, right? We are today at about 268. I'm stopping at 2020 because after that we have been we have seen a very low occupancy. Yep. So what this means is, at Infosys we have grown 2.5 times, more than 2.5 times in these 12 years, but our electricity bills have gone up only by 20%. That's a very clear, visible change that we have seen. And this is the reason why we've been able to focus on innovative techniques, innovative equipment, high efficiency equipment, and invested in retrofits year on year. We have seen huge reduction potential, huge reductions we have seen in our bills. This is the cost reduction, $240 million in electricity bills. That's the avoidance. So it's not that the buildings are all looking the same because we apply these parameters. They are still looking very beautiful. It's just about architects being more creative and including all the sustainability parameters during the design. So this is on the renewable energy. We are about 64% as of today. This is the FY23 data that we have published, where we were at 58%, mostly through our own generation and some PPAs that we have. Coming to emissions, how does this translate to emissions? So because we are finally talking about decarbonization and net zero, how do we achieve net zero from here? So you see the emissions intensity, how it has reduced by 75% in 12 years up to 2020. See the scope 1 and 2, which is the 40 to 10. That's the reduction. And you see the scope 3 emissions, which is related to travel, that's remained the same, 15 and 14. 15 in 2008, 14 in 2020. Almost same. Scope 3 emissions, which is related to travel. But our electricity consumptions, because of all the initiatives that we have implemented, has come down so drastically. A last thing on life cycle assessment. While we were talking about all the operational energy consumption, it's also very important to know what material is actually impacting your building in terms of embodied energy, right? Embodied carbon. So when we looked at one of our buildings, this is mainly the structure, not all the interior related stuff, but it's mostly the entire building structure and essential elements like all the concrete, steel, glazing, and so on. So if you see, if the building operations cause 1,000 tons of CO2 per year, the building construction and handing over is 16 times more. So that's what we found for an efficient building. It's 16 times of your annual operational carbon emission. So that's something to think about. That's a huge opportunity that we have. And it's very interesting to see 75% of this carbon is coming from concrete and steel. Just two materials in the building. So now you know where is the big opportunity to reduce embodied carbon. So on the last slide, if you scale this up, look at the bigger context. If you look at what the IT industry is going through, this is the NASSCOM data. We added about 450,000 IT staff in FY22 and 290,000 in FY23. This is the Class A IT space only, which translates to about 45 million and 29 million square feet. So if you look at EPI 200 versus 65, you see the opportunity. We would end up at 740 million kilowatt hour with an EPI of 200 versus 240 million with an EPI of 65. So that's the kind of opportunity we have just in the Class A IT office. Just scale this up to all the other commercial development that is happening, and looking at the fact where global building floor area is expected to double in the next 30 years. There is a tremendous opportunity to take a much more sustainable path in buildings' energy consumption and buildings' contribution to global emissions. With this, I'll leave you with the thought that we have a great opportunity to reduce our demand and change the course of the emissions trajectory that we are at. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Guru Prakash Shastri. Now that we have listened to the experience of improving buildings' energy efficiency from Mr. Shastri, let us move on to the next part of the session, the panel discussion. We have a distinguished panel of experts with us today who will share their insights and experience. This will be followed by a Q&A session for 10 minutes. On the panel, we have Mr. Anish Kadian. Mr. Kadian is a Senior Executive Director at CBRE South Asia Private Limited, Property Management India. His focus areas are identifying ways to enhance the value of assets as well as experience of occupants in the buildings through technology and superior customer service. He is a professional engineer and an active member of ISHRE and holds a master's degree in engineering. We also have Professor Jyotirmay Mathur here. Mr. Mathur works in the field of energy planning and modeling, building energy simulation, and energy conservation in buildings. He has, in his credit, over 110 journal papers, more than 200 talks, several research projects, including 5 international collaborative projects, besides having supervised 21 PhD scholars. Joining us today is also Dr. Saket Saraf. Dr. Saket Saraf is the founder and principal at PS Collective, a platform for advocacy, research, policy analysis, and consultancy to promote sustainable development. With over 25 years of experience in India and the USA, he has been part of various building energy performance and benchmarking initiatives in India over the last decade. Finally, we have Dr. Satish Kumar. Dr. Satish Kumar serves as the President and Executive Director of AEEE. Prior to AEEE, he was the Energy Efficiency Ambassador and led the energy management business at Schneider Electric India, a scientist at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, and the Chief of Party for the USAID-supported bilateral ECO3 project. The moderator for today's discussion today is Ms. Shruti Narayan. Ms. Shruti Narayan is C40's Regional Director for South and West Asia with global experience spanning over 2 decades. She leads C40's regional efforts to mainstream climate action for resilient and equitable cities. She has worked in several key global organizations such as USAID and the International Finance Corporation. I would also like to request Mr. Guru Prakash Shastri to be on stage with these panelists. I would like to request all the panelists to take their seats. Sorry for making you wait so much. And over to you, Ms. Narayan.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the 2 presentations that really set the context for why we are discussing and why we're having this panel. Such a compelling reason to have this discussion. So I'm going to start with Saket on the first question. And Saket, my question to you is, what do you think are the fundamental building blocks that are needed to create building performance standards?
Yeah, thanks, Shruti, and thanks to AEEE for this very exciting topic. So in my opinion, the fundamental building blocks, I would name four, two on the demand side and two on the supply side. Right? On the demand side, first is the market, right? And in market, of course, consumer awareness, ESG portfolio, performance contracts that Infosys talked about, but most importantly, valuing energy efficiency in real estate and real estate transactions. So I think that is one of the most important, like, demand side block. The second demand side block comes from climate action on how does energy performance influence climate debates both on mitigation and adaptation. And on the supply side, of course, and I guess we'll hear a lot more on this, is one is the benchmarking model and the data set itself, and this is kind of everybody's issue here, and I'm hoping to hear a lot more on data and models of benchmarking. And the last driver is the policy, right? And again, how do you kind of gap the bridge between intention-based code or a prescription-based code, taking it to the entire life cycle of building and bringing in performance in performance-based codes, right? So I would kind of stop here. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Saket, for being so succinct. But I'm going to ask a question to all the panelists to sort of respond to that and maybe give a thought, and anybody can come in, or all of you, is what do you think can be the role of building performance standards in sort of scaling up energy commitments that we make as a part of climate action plans, right? Cities are now increasing their commitments on net zero and, you know, setting very ambitious targets. And how do you think could be the role that building performance standards can play into helping cities deliver this? So anybody who wants to come in, open to all the panelists.
So that's a wonderful point, and in my opinion, allow me to be a little candid. No code or standard or a program can be really carved out in a true spirit without having proper benchmark studies in the background of it. I repeat, no code, no standard, no program can be developed in the correct way unless you have a benchmarking study backing up that development. What I mean by this is, look at the journey we had in the country. We had, after Energy Conservation Building Code coming up in 2007, and even before the star labeling for commercial buildings coming, how 2007 code came was there was data collected from few buildings. How many, I exactly don't know, but yes, there was a question raised later on about the representativeness of that data, if it is truly representing the current practices or not. And maybe that is the reason why the 2007 version is more design-oriented. You claim energy efficiency through your designed energy efficiency. And we are nearly silent in 2007 version of ECBC about what actually happens in terms of performance. Okay, you assume that a building nicely designed will perform well, which may or may not be correct. In 2017 version, what happened is we had 3 grades: basic ECBC, and ECBC plus, and then super ECBC. So we saw that there is a graded approach. How do you make a grading? You have standards. You get first division at 60% marks. You get second division if you have more than 48, and then you get third division and you don't pass. You have these benchmarks. So there is certain analysis which must have gone sometime, decades or centuries back, when you arrived at 60% or these benchmarks. So same way, must have been backed up by some analysis before defining what will make a building ECBC compliant, what would make a building ECBC plus level, what would make a building super ECBC, and so on and so forth. Okay, but again the question is, was the benchmarking analysis adequate enough to have a representation of these 3 different grades, or could have been even more, the 5 grades for star labeling and so on and so forth. So what is happening now, good thing is, in the country, what is happening is the SBC, the next version of ECBC, is in making. And fortunately, the paradigm is now starting to shift from design-based efficiency to performance-based efficiency, meaning thereby that benchmarking studies have been conducted at a much larger scale as compared to the previous versions. So in fact, ISHRAE's one initiative was supporting that with data coming from 519 buildings across the country of different kinds. Okay, so that is just initiation. I would say in order to have truly doing the benchmarking, you should have climatic zone specific data collection and benchmarking studies, and then only you can arrive at a national level policy which may have different benchmarks for different climatic zones and so on and so forth. So the summary of it is that this benchmarking is so important for any decision making, be it standard making, be it code making, be it carving out a program, whatever. I, frankly speaking, cannot imagine any of these things coming out without a benchmarking study.
Great. So thank you, Jyotirmoy. You actually answered the question that I was going to ask you next. So I'm going to ask you another question then. So now that it's almost, like you said, is established that benchmarking is very, very critical for developing code, right, and ensuring the performance-based. You know, one of the charts I think Akash showed was maybe, you know, how the compliance is still lacking, right? So the question to you is that even if we, let's say, come up with performance-based codes, what kind of compliance mechanisms may be required to ensuring that they are actually delivered on ground?
Okay, so that's a tricky one, definitely. But yes, let me answer to the best of my knowledge. So compliance, as Akash had shown, has been a global challenge. Okay, the best level he has shown was 5 on 10. Okay, and it will remain a challenge. Why? Because there is a lack of transparency. And the lack of transparency cannot be removed all of a sudden. And that is actually the bottleneck also for the next round of benchmarking. You have compliance, you have collection of data from one round of compliance, and that compliance-based data collection feeds the next round of benchmarking. So compliance would remain a challenge. The more we digitize the processes, the easier and the better would be for the next round of development of the codes and the next round of development of benchmarks. So I would say try to digitize the process as much as possible so that there is no question that this person is not giving a data. Unless he gives the data, compliance certificate would not be given. So key is, I think Telangana, if Dr. Vishal is there, he has done some bit of digitization of that ZBC implementation process in Telangana. So that has been quite helpful in solving the problem to some extent.
Great, thank you. I think that was really well put, right? Like benchmarking needed to actually create the standards, but also triggering their compliance, right? So kind of becoming really fundamental from the creation and the delivery of that. So I'm going to move to Anish next. And CBRE has a significant amount of buildings, and you've been working on collecting data, right? And data is the key to benchmarking. And so how do you think, organizations like CBRE can play a role in making this data more open source, accessible to others to help in sort of benchmarking?
So, I think, again, this is a tricky question. I'll tell you why it's a tricky question. We manage many buildings, the company that I work with. We manage a lot of buildings, more than 250 maybe. A lot of them are new buildings. Many of them one building is about 40, 45 years old. One thing which is common across the board is data is not automated. It's still manually driven. There are Excel sheets which are being put in, the latest buildings and the older buildings as well. So while as a building manager or somebody who's managing so many buildings, I can proudly say that yes, we have a lot of data, but is it the right quality data? We don't really know so well. Is that data reliable? Again, that's an issue. So I think, and that's what I think Professor Jyotirmoy said, that digitization is going to help in that. And I'll give an example of the US Energy Star program, which is there. I think that's, and I've been saying it in a lot of conferences that I attend. It's a voluntary program. I'm sure a lot of you know about it. It's a voluntary program, just people, you create a login and you give your energy data. You're benchmarked automatically with all the people who have taken up that program. And you're given a score of 1 to 100 and all. But they've also integrated the utilities, the suppliers of equipments. Data is uploaded automatically, and even the utility providers, say for example, a chiller manufacturer, can also get data, anonymized, of course. What that does is it creates an ecosystem for automatic data reporting. You are able to see where your building is against all the others. Now, we don't have that right now. So I think the way forward for us is to somehow reach that stage. Again, how will we adopt it? I think the green building movement, especially in India, is a classic example of no compliance. It's been done because people were incentivized for it. They got extra FAR, that started the movement, but then developers started asking for it, the occupiers. They started asking, if you don't have at least a gold certification, they will not even evaluate your building to take up space. And this is all the big, large corporates. So it was kind of a cyclical thing. The same thing will happen with energy when you have it available freely. It will just put some pressure on the owners, building owners. So if they're low, then they will have to answer to their occupiers why their energy performance is low. But it'll raise the standards. So I think that's how we should be moving forward to get this benchmarking to be more effective. So, and just to add on to what he said, compliance will always be a challenge. Incentivization will be easier, I feel.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a question to all the panelists to, sort of react to what Anish said is, how do you, like create a movement in creating that ecosystem, right? Ecosystem being sort of a key to, in a way you're saying, making that the quality of data getting verified, right? So what could be some of the ways one has to start from somewhere, right? So what do you think could be a way to create this ecosystem and ensure that organizations like yours and maybe like Infosys who are creating or collating this data are able to very sort of confidently put it out there as open source? So any reactions from the panelists? Sakit?
So one thing that many cities around the world have successfully done is building energy disclosure or transparency policies. Right? And this has multiple benefits, but I think the first point of benefit is mass data availability, reporting, disclosure, which becomes the first point of entry, right? And that is still at a very, very coarse level, but then augment it with systems and subsystem level data, as Anish mentioned. But I think starting with this broad ecosystem of data, where the cities require all the building occupants and managers to report their consumption data. That is one part. And second, I think is, maybe Satish wants to talk more about it, is at a national level, a data collection program equivalent to what we have in US, like CBEX. So,
Satish,
yeah, so my sense is that, I mean, we have been working on this for close to like 17, 18 years now. I think this started under Eco3 project, and there have been many attempts to collect data and analyze the data and do that. I still feel that government doesn't understand the importance of building sector benchmarking. Absolutely no recognition and no understanding. When we are going to Airport Authority of India and saying, so they have no idea. I mean, say, okay, I think, oh, we want to make, I think, us carbon neutral. First, evaluate yourself where you are. But there is nobody who is saying that, okay, how do we go about? Is there a baseline? Is there something? Same thing with the hospital survey that Akash showed. I think it's such a, if you have to start your journey, you have to start with benchmarking. But because that understanding is not there, it's very hard to say that can we actually have a national benchmarking program? Which government agency is going to back up and say that MOSPI or BE or Niti Aayog should actually collect and data and publish it and do it as a national benchmarking program? So I think that's a very, very fundamental question if we think that government has to do this. And I do believe that while we have done some national benchmarking exercise, it's not like a non-profit organization or private sector's job to actually undertake this exercise. It will never be sustainable. We can do one or two, but it has to be institutionalized. So that's a big challenge in my opinion. The second thing I would say, and I think Anish mentioned, I think green buildings need to undergo a revolution. A lot of us, LEED fellows, have actually decided not to work with green buildings because we think there is rampant greenwashing that is going on currently. So while I think it has raised the bar in terms of like creating awareness, but how deep is that? I mean, we were involved with this iconic building project, and I said that we will not certify this G20 unless the building discloses, I think, what its performance. And we struggled. Infosys actually gave us the number, there was SEPT and others. But it's such a hard thing. So we have to put pressure that whether we are talking about public data disclosure or whether we are talking about, I think, a green building platinum or ECSBC, there will be unintended consequences if we are not careful and if we are not putting building performance as the center thing. And I think the timing is right. There are BRSR, there is like ESG, there is sustainability linked loans. Many of these things are saying that don't do smoke and mirror, don't just show us a label. We want to see actually how the buildings are performing. So I think some of these things, we have been talking about it, but I think it's our collective responsibility to, I think, move the needle, I think, on this agenda and say that we really need to get this right. Thank you.
Thank you. And
I just have one thing to add to Satish and some connecting some of the dots here. So, of course, one is we do have new regulations coming in. Disclosures are becoming mandatory for several companies. Maybe in a few years, we'll have all registered companies to be disclosing their environmental data. So what Satish said was very relevant because we need to get into sector-specific indicators. And that's where we need very clear benchmarking. We need to establish benchmarks for each sector. And even within the building sector, maybe the typology of the building will have different indicators, different KPIs, different benchmarks. So that becomes very important. And the second thing is, one of you guys mentioned digitization. So right now, BRSR is mandatory for the large companies, and we do publish this report. Maybe in the future, there has to be a mechanism where all these comes into a public database where you can easily look up and find out where you are, where you stand with this type of companies, with this sector or something. So that can really move the market in the right direction.
thank you. And Guru, I was going to come next to you actually, as a great segue to being such a compelling presentation of making a business case on why any organization should do this, right? It's an established journey that you outlined. So how, and we are still counting the numbers, right, on our hands with organizations like yours that are doing this. So how do you think you or Infosys could be kind of a lighthouse to influence more organizations in doing that? I mean, the question is, why wouldn't anyone not do this?
I think it's more related to a lack of awareness, lack of initiative, I would say, lack of will, more of, because otherwise if somebody actually looks at these numbers, it's a definite go. So what we can do is, and we have been doing in some way over the past few years, is that we have published case studies, we have published our numbers to a large extent. We also have hosted several organizations in our campus to look at the numbers, because a lot of people feel, oh no, Infosys can do anything, Infosys can spend any amount of money. It's not the case. We are not spending more than any class A developer. We are much less than that, mostly. And we have achieved much higher efficiencies. So we have organized site visits for a lot of government agencies, including ECBC workshops. But somehow that has to be, I think, even more scaled up. After that, we have not seen any result after all these visits, including the G20 visit I was talking about, right? The Ministry of Power, everybody looking at these numbers and seeing how much change can happen by shifting to a much higher efficiency in the building sector. It's a very large contribution to our national goals. So that's something that needs to be driven down.
Can I just add on this? I'll tell you why maybe this is happening so that we can try and find an answer. So majority of the, I would say, you have campuses. Very few companies have their own campuses. Most of them are in commercial or ITS spaces, right? And there's about 700 million square feet of grade A space as of now. Every year we're adding about 41 million square feet, depending on how the economy is going. Now, for a developer, just try to understand from a developer's point of view. Electricity is paid directly by the tenants. right? Here you're paying yourself, but their electricity is paid by the tenants. Air conditioning is part of that thing. So developer charges a fixed CAM, right? Or it will be a pass-through or whatever the maintenance charges. So if the rental is say 40, 50 rupees, 60 rupees, and your CAM charges are maybe 15, 18 rupees, if you bring it down by say a rupee or something, it's not going to make much of a difference for the occupier or the developer. So the focus is not there to really bring down the energy efficiency like you did for your own campuses, right? So what now has changed is that ESG has come in. And all corporates are going on the ESG direction. They're setting up their ESG goals, net zero, and all that stuff. And what this has forced developers to do is, because developers are supplying electricity to the tenants, so they're in the scope 3 or scope 2, how you work it out. So it has now forced developers to rethink and get their energy consumption down for their own, say, common areas, as well as for the tenants. What they're also doing is they're telling the tenants, if you're taking space in my building, I've got a green platinum rated building, I want you also to do a fit out, which has, say, the levels you're talking about, say 3 watts per square foot for lighting and all. They're kind of mandating it because they're saying that this is our building. We want it to be, because majority of the cost of energy is coming from the tenants. So I think that is where how the change is coming in. It is slow, but being in the building sector side, I'm seeing the change coming, and I think it's a positive change.
So that's on the operational cost, but I'm talking about the initial cost as well. So by adopting efficient practices, we have saved on the initial cost. That's something that
yes, I think that is another area to explore.
There is more awareness creation, and where I think big players like CBRE can play a major role there.
Definitely, yeah.
Satish, you wanted to also comment on it, right?
No, so I think the split incentive problem is fairly well known, I think, what Anish is describing. But I think one of the fundamental challenges, I mean, when we were working on, I think, the book that Guru mentioned, I think it was just coming back that the innovation culture, I think that we sometimes underplay that and say, hey, this is something, and Guru is underplaying it. But I think for a company to embark on that journey and have that innovation culture, have the support of the top management, that yes, I think you can go and do 2 or 3x kind of like changes, is I think what is not going to be there in a commercial world where I think there are commercial developers, and unless there is a disruptor who comes in and shows that, hey, there is a different way. So that's the challenge for all of us.
Satish, I'm going to come back to you on the next question. Obviously we've been talking about energy benchmarking, and you kind of also addressed this in your comments, but how do we have organizations like, Infosys, CBRE that are taking the lead, but there is no national program. Like you said, that there is a need to looking at that. I'm also wondering, do you think there could be a role of financial regulators also in like SEBI, or which make it a requirement for some of these organizations to disclose, their energy consumptions, or, so just wanted to understand from you, what do you think could be the role the national government can play in creating some of these, mainstreaming some of these policies?
Yeah, no, I think I wish I had a straight answer to that, but my sense, I'll give an anecdote actually. I was at ACEEE summer study and Energy Information Administration. So you talked about the Energy Star program. The basis of that program is the CBEX data that Energy Information Administration conducts. And I was, after their life, it was like an informal session, and there were people, and I said that, can you tell me, I think, how much does it cost for the CBEX survey to be organized every 3 or 4 years? And they were not answering it, but I think such is the pedigree of the people, so people went on website, this, that, and we came to some conclusion that each cycle is about $50 to $100 million. That's what I think it costs to publish that CBEX. So I was saying that, okay, so maybe we can take 100, maybe we can take 50. But I was saying that, is it possible that we go to MOSPI or we go to Niti Aayog or B and say, look, the benefits that one can derive from national level benchmarking is so enormous, and can you, I mean, of course we are not going to get $50 million in India to run that program, but can we actually do this in, say, 25 crores, which could still be like 1/10 or 1/15th of, I think, what that number is. And of course, this kind of a thing also requires, because when we were talking to MOSPI, so they said, look, we have access to a statisticians, but we will need, I think, domain experts, and we will need building energy sector professionals who understand this building to really craft like a very nice survey, which will have to be pilot tested. And I think there was some momentum some time back. EIA was involved, IEA was involved, Niti Aayog was conducting, I think, several workshops. So my sense is that I think some of these things will have to be done, I think, in order for us to communicate the importance of it. But there are some other things that can also be done without waiting for, I think, the government. One of the things that I talked to my colleagues at AEEE, that many times we go for large data sets and others, and this has been our learning when we are doing like hospital benchmarking survey, and Akash commented that maybe it's not a good time to do long format surveys, because I think the difficulties and the effort that goes into this is humongous, and nobody is there sitting there and kind of like willing to put your survey and put all these numbers. So what is it that can be done where the IT technology, where the AI technology, where the crowdsourcing techniques, I think some of these things can actually be advanced, and where we can say that how can we actually spot that, oh, this is an incomplete, imperfect, inconsistent data set, but I'm going to actually work with it and try to do better. So I feel that I think that kind of a mindset is also very important, because if we get a perfect data set that Infosys is providing, then we can go back home basically, because that is not, I think, what we are going to get in real life. So I think this recognition that we have to work, I think, with whatever we are going to get is there. Otherwise, anybody can come and do a very good analysis if we have very high quality data sets. So that's the challenge, and that's, I think, we need to do our work, and we need to push the government.
Thank you. So I'm going to, yeah, so any comments?
I would just second Satish's note that I don't think we need to wait till we have the best data in the world, and also that the best data is not correlated with the best benchmarking efforts.
Saket, I'm going to come to you next in a little bit of a forward-looking scenario. So talking about building performance standards, as you know, a lot of cities, and C40 has been working with many cities as well on climate action plans. What do you think could be a way of using those to inspire cities to looking at building performance standards, like integrating that with their commitment? How do you think that could be a way to look at the future?
I think this is a very, very exciting area and a kind of a next frontier for building performance benchmarking. Depending on what you're reading, about 38% of the emissions come from building space, right? But if you go to any Indian city, they have absolutely no idea of the building stock. Forget the emissions from the building, they have no idea about the building footprint, right? And when you don't have any idea of the baseline, how do you embark on a journey to say, okay, my emissions are going down year after year by X%? Or even simpler, how do you set targets for your own city in absence of a benchmarking data, right? So that is the one thing that benchmarking helps. Second is the whole idea about mitigation and adaptation. So if you're following news, EU is struggling in the wake of Ukraine war to say, okay, can we retrofit the bottom 15% of our housing stock, right? Because of energy security, energy poverty, right? And now, because they're sitting on tons of data, they have some means to identify which is the 15 bottom performing housing stock where they can intervene, right? We have nothing like that. When we talk about heat waves and mitigation impact, we have absolutely no benchmark, no baseline for that, right? So that is another, so both for vulnerability and mitigation, as well as for setting up a baseline and to track our progress and stay tuned to our commitments, I think benchmarking is foundational.
So one just quick thing, we have been trying to get this building stock numbers, and we have published some papers and other things. And when the Niti Aayog IESS version 1 came out, so we were reviewing that model and we were asking a lot of questions. And we gave them a very hard time, I think, in terms of that, how are you projecting the scenario for building sector and especially on commercial building. So what they did that for the ISS 2.0 version, they came to us and said that, okay, at least tell us, I think for office sector, for hospitals and others, I think what's the, at least the range, I think based on best available information. We don't have any primary data sources. So I think we provided that, we provided some estimate of EPI numbers based on the paper that we published. And I think that is going to get used for India's LTLEDS report that comes out, which is official report, I think, by Government of India. So I think it's sometimes advocacy and kind of like a little bit of outreach and just questioning, I think, what government is doing. Yes, there is a better way, even if there is not a primary survey, can help things along. So I think we need to probably do more of that.
Thank you, Satish. Jyoti ma'am, I'm going to come to you to also like forward thinking, right? We know benchmarking is not available, it impacts the development and the compliance, but what do you think could be a way to start like now in evolving the current data that we may have, or the possibility of working on benchmarking in parallel to, you know, sort of developing high quality performance standards?
So I would say now that at least we are talking about benchmarking. If you see 10 years back or 5 years back, we were not even talking about benchmarking and data collection. Now we are at least talking about importance of data collection and trying to make it mandatory. So first and foremost thing is make data disclosure, as Saket also pointed out earlier, mandatory. What we should do is, now that we are doing it and trying to do it at least in the National Building Energy Efficiency Code, try to bring as much as benchmarking based performance indicators in the code as possible, so that at least people who are genuinely trying to implement the code, they are at least doing it right. I mean, the best of the case, again, coming back to the Singapore case where 50% compliance is there, I'm not expecting more than 20-30% compliance in the country. But still, those who want to implement the code by heart, they should at least be having a reasonable benchmark to compare their building design with. And this also necessitates that we go deeper from the building level benchmarking to systems and subsystem level benchmarking. Means what Guru mentioned, that per unit envelope area, this much, not more than this much of heat gain, or maybe if I'm talking about a central system, not more than this power consumption, what Mr. Prabhat Goyal showed in the morning, for the chiller side or the plant side. Air distribution side, I again put a benchmark that a good design should be limited to this number and not more than this, so that a designer who really wants to implement the code in letter and spirit is facilitated. So we have an opportunity, we have next 6 months to correct this. I hope this is done in this attempt itself. Let us not wait for the next attempt.
Thank you. Anish, I'm going to come to you next. And, you know, trying to just understand that, you know, we know, like you said, that it's difficult to disclose data that's not been verified for quality. But what do you think could be, like, looking forward? Like, what could CBRE do in terms of verifying the data, you know, with whatever constraints you have, and creating the ecosystem that you're able to sort of start disclosing this and triggering at some level that disclosure of data?
So CBRE per se, I'm not very, very sure, but I have a suggestion. Any architects in this hall? Many. I'm sure there are many architects here. Right, so just one, I'll tell you why I'm asking this question. So an architect, when they're the ones who design the building and they get everybody together, they have a DBR, they prepare it, and they say, okay, this is how the building will perform. Now, we know as building managers, when you start a building, maybe you don't lease it out. So for the next 1 year, it's only 10% or 20% leased out, but you've got three chillers there, which are just running full capacity, running but not at the design capacity. Sometimes you might even change the usage. There might be a IT company who comes and wants to put up a lab or something, a data center, so energy consumption goes high. So there are a lot of variances which happen. Forget the variances, they're not so many, but most buildings start the way they're designed. What typically happens is, depending on how much if it's a Stratus-hold building, then you can forget it. You go to Nehru Place in Delhi, I don't think any of the buildings, the way they were designed and the way they're operating now, none of them will operate like that. Buildings which are leased out, the owners have say, there will still be some better thing. As architects, I don't know if you do it, but can you go back to your buildings after the first year after 5 years and see how was the building performed. And then whatever the benchmarks at that time, can you revise those, can you update those? And this becomes a practice. And again, I'm saying I haven't seen it happening, but if it is happening, great. But that's one suggestion for the future for the architects in this room. And second is just a word of caution, I would say. And I'm saying this because I'm just reading a book right now called God, Human, Animal, and Machine. It's written by somebody who's writing about philosophy and technology. That data, we are in this big data world, and it throws up a lot of things. Artificial intelligence is there and all, but how are you using the data is going to be very, very important. And that's where I think these kind of sessions come in. Data can throw up a lot of things, but we all have to be just a bit careful in how we use the data and not later data drive the outcomes. So I think these are the two, I would say, future ways we can look at benchmarking in the future.
Great. Thank you. Guru, coming to you in the sense, just trying to understand that, what's next in the journey of Infosys? I'm just, what could be next in looking at trying to, what could be done? How can you inspire us more?
So specifically on buildings, we continue to look at innovative technologies to, improve efficiencies even further. Maybe look at, since now we have a lot of data about our buildings, millions of data points coming in every day. Maybe we should look at some really good tools to, analyze the data and give us some really good insights, because it's not manually possible to look at all of these stuff. Of course, all the basic things like efficiency monitoring, design versus actual, all that things are happening. But if you want to go beyond, maybe look at predictive analysis or look at how do we study a pattern and come to a much better way to operate a certain system, that's something, that's an opportunity that we are looking at. We're looking at tools which can optimize our operations even further and give insights on our design. The second is on the materials, where I feel there is a huge scope to improve our designs with respect to embodied carbon. Because what we saw for 2 or 3 of our buildings, it was an eye-opener for us, because we never thought the embodied carbon, just the A1 to A5, which is the cradle to gate, cradle to handing over of the building. So only the initial part of the building can cause equivalent to 15 to 20 years of operational carbon of the building. That's something that we need to really think about. How do we optimize the designs to reduce material usage, and how do we source materials which are better, especially concrete, steel, are something that we need to look at. And on the third thing is, on an organization-wide, we are looking at carbon removals and carbon sequestration as the next step, next logical step for us towards our journey to net zero. So yeah, reduction through efficiency, avoidance, increase our renewables as much as possible. That's something that we are working on with different states. And then looking at some innovative projects in carbon removals and sequestration.
And I just had a follow-up question. As you said that you've obviously been working through this journey with many other stakeholders, right? Like architects, HVAC, people, energy, electricity, lighting, all of that. So, we were discussing, I think Anish brought up the point of an ecosystem creation and data and benchmarking. Do you think Infosys has been able to impact these and trigger a level of understanding within this ecosystem that you've been operating in on the value of benchmarking and data? And have you seen that change over the years that you've been working with this value chain on data?
Yeah. I definitely believe so. I'm sure many of our OEMs, many of our partners here would also agree. The entire ecosystem has come up to a fairly good level because we are continuously pushing them for better products, higher efficiencies, better designs, better KPIs. So many times we've heard our consultants come back and say that, I've been asked to design a building for this company, and they have given a brief to me to design a building like the Infosys building. So that's as simple as it gets. So many cases this has happened. And also another example is when we started this journey in 2008, there was nobody who was willing to design a radiant cooling system in India. We were the first one to have this building. We got a consultant from the US to design the building for us, design the radiant system for us. Now there is so much capacity created because we have today more than 15 million square feet of radiant cooled space. And we have created enough capacity. Everybody is aware of what is radiant cooling and how to design a radiant cooling system effectively.
Great, thank you. Satish, I'm going to come to you, and it's also a question that I'm asking him, but would love to kind of get thoughts of the panelists as well. So, you know, we've clearly established that benchmarking is important. It really can drive, you know, developing codes and also, you know, some larger policies that we have, and we need not only benchmarking from energy perspective, but also system perspective, right? So what do you think, and we of course went through a lot of challenges and barriers that we have, but also, you know, areas where we can influence action, like working with the national government. So Satish, the question is, what do you see the future of benchmarking? Like, what do you think would be, you know, based on your sort of knowledge and interaction, where do you think it will go? Like,
I know that you have been reminded of time, so I'm going to keep my intervention short. But I think if I have to say one thing, mandatory data disclosure. I think that can start to bring about the transformation that we are all wanting to see. And the reason is that people, if there is a level playing field, nobody is going to complain. So it's the same thing for everybody. So every green building program, if you go say, oh, this is private, we are not required, we are not, I think we cannot divulge. Mandatory data disclosure. Automatically look at whether it's LEED or GRIHA or EDGE or whatever, which buildings I think under these green building programs are actually where the intent and performance is matching and which is not. So it's a very natural differentiator. I think if Guru is talking about this embodied carbon. I think we all went to US and जो वहाँ पे घुट्टी पिलाई गई थी हम लोगों को कि embodied carbon के बारे में चिंता मत करो. It doesn't matter. ये ना 5% और 10% मैटर करता है और 80 और 90% जो है ऑपरेशनल करता है. And the reason was that US में yes operational energy is much higher. So in a way I think they are doing this, but in India embodied carbon is bloody important, बहुत important है. तो I think कि उसमें अगर disclosure आएगा और उसमें अगर आप बोल रहे हो कि मेरे को ESG रिपोर्टिंग करना है, मेरे को स्कोप 3 करना है, तो आप डेटा रिक्वायरमेंट डालो ना. आपको BRSR आई वाज टॉकिंग एंड बोला कि वी आर शिटिंग इन आवर पैंट्स कि BRSR कितना मतलब कंपनीज के लिए कितना ये मतलब डिफिकल्ट होने वाला और कितना डेटा आपको ये डिस्क्लोज करें. यू कैन बी इन लीगल ट्रबल इफ़ यू आर फॉल्सिफाइंग द डेटा और ये चीज़ का. तो आई थिंक कि अगर प्राइवेट सेक्टर के ऊपर में प्रेशर आ रहा है तो आई थिंक कि पब्लिक सेक्टर उसको बहुत ईजिली बोल सकती है कि ओके वी आर गोइंग टू हेल्प यू इन दिस जर्नी. आप इसको मैंडेटरी डेटा डिस्क्लोज करो. सो आई थिंक दैट्स माय थिंग.
thank you. Anybody else wants to come in, but quick and succinct because you want to get some Korean. Okay.
I just want to. Yeah, just want to have a cautionary word. Before we lock ourselves too much into energy benchmarking, I think we should very quickly move to carbon benchmarking, because going ahead, it's not only how much energy you're consuming, but when you're consuming and where is the energy coming from would become very important, right? Maybe next 2-3 years, okay, energy benchmarking is okay, but by 2030 with renewable supply, people saying we'll do thermal energy storage, decentralized storage, then when the energy is being used and where is it coming from would become equally important, right? So let's not lock ourselves in energy benchmarking, but quickly start thinking about carbon benchmarking.
Thank you, Saket.
Yeah, but I feel the energy benchmarking should always precede the carbon benchmarking, because first you have to reduce the demand, then only you should look at the source of the energy.
Thank you.
That is the first step. That is the first
Okay,
step.
yeah. Take them off. Okay.
I'll just say the future of benchmarking is bright. It's a technology which is going to do it. And there's no other way. We will have to do it, and I'm sure we'll do it. But my only thing is, instead of mandatory, I think incentives will work better. That's my personal feeling and my experience.
Or taxation.
Oh, that's a sure short way.
Okay, we can debate it out.
So
Incentives rather than incentives, mandatory. Yeah,
Okay.
I was going to say the
Yeah.
same thing. Sticks work better in our country rather than carrots.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, so we have lots of discussions to take off the stage here, but we're going to now open it up for question and answers. So is anybody, Akash, managing the floor? Okay. Yeah. We'll probably take two or three questions. Yeah. So we'll take all the three questions, and I'm just going to ask the panelists to respond to them. Yeah.
So I would second Dr. Satish Kumar's suggestion that we should make it mandatory for disclosure. But at the same time, some of us go to a lot of conferences like this, and it's a known word that India has the second largest footprint of green buildings. And today we are hearing something totally opposite of that from 6 stalwarts on the panel. So we don't get to know which one is right or which one is wrong. So the next part of the story is that I'm sure there are finance people in this room, and you don't sort of rate a company till the company is up and operational. You don't say, I'm launching a company which is a 5-star company kind of thing. So how do we launch a building as a platinum building before it is up and running and verified to be energy efficient? That's the question. Thank you.
So, sorry, please. We'll just take all the questions, and I'm going to ask everybody to respond.
So it's also about, while if it will help in decarbonization, but to the point that Dr. Saket was making, that let's not get into a tunnel vision only around energy. Of course, energy is the beginning, but there is a lot more to carbon when it comes to the built environment. And we should take a step back and make everybody aware of it. Because if the built environment stakeholders don't do it, so it's just about stepping back and saying that, okay, while we may be energy efficient and all that, we have made a mess out of the blue-green infrastructure. So it's important that we look at that and how that contributes to the, the increased demand of cooling because of the temperature rise due to the materials that we are using and the decimation of urban greens, blue-green infrastructure. It's up, needs to be looked at.
One last question?
Hi, this question is for Anish, really. I wanted to find out from you that, since you're doing so much benchmarking and collecting data from all your customers' buildings, what is the maximum demand, electrical demand that you have seen, and what's the maximum cooling demand that you have noticed in these developer buildings, per square foot or per square meter, whatever?
Okay, so I'm going to just ask the first, anybody wants to respond to the first 2 questions?
I think one thing that I would say, and I think is specifically to Sunita's point, I am a little bit of a skeptic. I think when we are not solving a smaller problem, and we say, okay, we want to expand the problem, and we can solve that. So I think, I'm sorry, थोड़ा सा मेरे को उसमें ये होता है, हम लोगों को पहले छोटा वाला जो चीज़ है, उसको कर लें, और फिर उसके साथ में हम लोगों को कॉन्फिडेंस रहेगा बड़ा करने का. आई थिंक कि कार्बन इज़ अ ह्यूमंगस स्पेस. ऑफ कोर्स आई थिंक कि इट्स नॉट कि बिल्डिंग का कार्बन है या ये है, एंड ऑल ऑफ अस वुड लाइक कि डीकार्बनाइजेशन हो, बट पहले मैं बोलता हूँ यार हम लोग ऑपरेशनल एनर्जी पे कर लें, उसको फिर हम लोग एम्बॉडीड कार्बन पे कर लें, फिर ग्लोबल में जितना कार्बन है उस पर कर लें.
So just a quick one, in my opinion, we need to bring MNV to the forefront, which unfortunately is not there. All the green buildings pledge to do the MNV, but only measurement and verification of performance. Okay, so which comes to the performance-based analysis. So unless we force them to do a performance verification, we would probably not be solving the problem, and false claims would continue to come.
Okay? That why don't we bring the rating of platinum building after the NN? Because it solves
90% of your problem.
So that O&M is there, right? O&M, that's how it.
You yourself are on record saying no compliance.
I didn't say compliance. No, it's voluntary, right? No, it's just voluntary, but I think that's already taken care of, what you're saying.
Okay, so do you want to respond?
Yeah, and you said you wanted to know what is the maximum demand. I didn't get your name, sorry. You're, oh, yeah, yes. Yeah, what the demand?
3 watts per square foot.
Yeah, yeah,
the industry is at 8.
Yeah.
What are you actually seeing as maximum?
So I think what he's done is for an occupier for their own campus.
No, I'm just saying
Right,
this
so,
is
yeah,
this
as-
is operational, right? Value.
No, so see, it's very, very different for a multi-tenanted building. There are, because the space inside a building is so some companies are, mostly I think there are around 6. What he told about, the lighting, for example.
No. What Guru was saying is the total, including HVAC, including everything, is 3 watts per square foot.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to, step in because maybe if you can just catch up
I'll-
with
maybe
the team
I'll
and
discuss
discuss
with
this,
you,
that
sure.
would be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Saket, you wanted
Yeah,
to
I would
comment
just
quickly?
want to respond to Mr. Goel's comment. Though we are talking about benchmarking as one single number, when we do the implementation, ideally we should think of asset benchmarking and operational benchmarking. And so when you get a building first, like on day one, it would have a certain asset benchmark, which would maybe degrade or improve as it is maintained and operated, right? And second part is an operational benchmark on how well or how poorly is the building being used, right? And the real benchmark of the building is a combination of asset plus operation. Like splitting this into 2 parts kind of solves multiple problems that the panel has been deliberating.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you once again to AEEE for such a fantastic conference and all the partners. And thank you, Satish, for this. And thank you to all my panelists. It's been absolutely wonderful to discuss such a critical topic that will really shape the way India, looks and grows and is able to deliver to its commitments on climate and energy. So thank you very much. Thank you.